Hello and welcome to Maya 101 week number 5, where we're going to be taking a look at effects. Now, specifically, we're going to be looking at one effect in particular. We are going to be making a sparkler style effect. Now, along the way, there's all kinds of stuff that I want to look at that we are probably all relatively new to. We're going to start off by organizing our scene into layers. Now, these will not be render layers. These are just going to be visibility layers so that you can take some things you're not using and hide them. Somebody says the password does not work. Are you 100% sure? Can anybody confirm that the password over in the actual live class page is not working? Because I have several people who have gotten in. Let me pause the video real quick while we get this sorted. Okay, so we're going to start off by breaking our scene up into layers. Now, the effect we're going to make, as I mentioned, is a sparkler. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with the concept, it's really just a stick, and there's a part of it that has been dipped in some sort of sparkly gunpowder explosive material, so that when you light it, sparks fly off of one end. And that'll slowly burn its way down the stick until all of this fuel has been expired. That's how they work. So, that's what we're going to be constructing. Now, along the way, we've got some things to do. We have to model this. We've got to create a material for it. We've got to rig the material. We're going to do some fancy stuff with the material so that we can actually make the material update as we animate. And then we've got to create, well, that shouldn't really be an R, we've got to create a particle system. So, that's everything we're going to be covering today. Now, as a part of this process, we are going to be taking a look at a new new to you guys, an animation feature known as set-driven key. It is such a cool concept, but it's very easily a mind blower for folks who are not used to it. So that's probably where I'm going to begin the lecture today, is just getting you through set-driven key and helping you understand kind of how that works. And then we'll take a step back, quickly go through the modeling of our little sparkler, create its material, and then we'll know everything we need to get that material rigged up, create our particle system, and then we'll be done. So, let's go ahead and get started. Over inside of Maya, you should have your scene, and it should look something vaguely like this. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and turn off high-quality rendering, and I'll just use the default material just to keep things nice and snappy in the viewport. So, well, that's my demo. I don't really need to show you guys that. Haha. So, we've got our little cherry, and he does some bouncing, and he lands on the whipped cream, which is, of course, very cool. And now what we're going to need to do is create our sparkler effect, but first I want to put away parts of our scene that we're not going to use. And an easy way to do that is to divide our scene up into render layers. Now if you take a look here inside your channel box / layer editor here at the very bottom, you have the layer window broken up into 3 tabs. We have display layers, render layers, and animation layers. Right now we're only worried about display layers. So what I'd like you to do is select all of the pieces of your cake. So that would be the plate, the cake itself, the whipped cream you may have put on top. And once you have all of that selected, take a look over here in your channel box layer editor. And at the very bottom, you're going to see these 4 buttons. The first 2 allow you to move objects up and down in the list of layers. The second is to create a new layer, but the last button, the 4th button, will create a new layer and assign the selected objects. Go ahead and click on that now. This creates a brand new layer called Layer 1, whose visibility is already set to on. If you take a look here inside your layers, you'll see this little tiny V button, and if you click on that, it'll hide whatever was placed inside that layer. Now, while a layer is visible, you also have some other options. You can set that layer to just be a template, and a template will only show in wireframe, it will not render, and you cannot select it. If you click this button again, it'll take you to a reference. A reference will render, but you cannot select it, although you can snap to it if you need to. And then finally, you just have nothing, which is just a regular object. Works and behaves the way it always does. What I'd like you to do is to go ahead and hide this layer, because we don't really need to be able to see our cake. However, notice the name of the layer. It's currently layer 1, which is not particularly informative, and it'd be good if we could change that. If you double-click the name of a layer, you'll get the Edit Layer window, and this allows you to rename this. I'm going to call this LYR as a prefix, so I know it's a layer, and let's call this Cake, which is great because it sounds like layer cake. But that way, at a glance, I can tell what this will show and hide when I click on the little first button here. Now, I'd like to do a really quick ready check for people who are following along. If you are attending and following along, please make sure you check your participate status. And I'll go ahead and give a quick pause and reset statuses. All right, I got a couple of questions during the little pause there. It said, where are new objects placed after we place in a new layer? Are they in the same current created layer, or are they orphans? They are orphans. They are not automatically placed in a layer, which if I create some object, like a polygon cone, but then I hide the layer cake layer, notice the cone is still there. You can add and remove from an existing layer just by selecting an object, right-clicking, and saying Add Selected Objects. So now the cone comes along. Or I can have it selected, right-click, and choose Remove Selected Objects. And now it's out of the layer. But I don't need that cone, even though it does look like a nice party hat. Okay, so now let's continue on about our business. So we've got a layer for our cake. Let's do another layer for our table. Just select your table and click on the new layer with the Selected Objects button. Double click, and we'll call this layer underscore table. Save. And now we can hide both those objects. Then finally, we need one more with our cherry, so just select the bits and pieces of your cherry, do it one more time, and we'll call this layer cherry. So just kind of a nice way to organize your scene and show and hide things very, very quickly. Please note you also have these up and down arrows that you can use to rearrange things. So let's say we wanted cherry and then cake and then table. We could grab the cake layer, click the up arrow, and move that up the list. So you can arrange those however you like. You cannot have nested layers. It does not work that way. So if you're a Photoshop person saying, well, can I have a layer within another layer? The answer is no. Okay. So, now what I want you to do is bring your table up and go ahead and at least temporarily bring your cake up. It'll be good for keeping things scaled nicely. And then save your scene. So hit Control S. Alright, once you have saved your cake, go ahead and do a new scene. We're going to do something entirely new, and I need everyone's attention while we do it. What we're going to do is tackle the concept of set-driven key. Let's say a quick question rolled in. Layers don't group the objects, do they? No, they don't group them. But there's a node for each layer. Old Geek, what are you saying no to? Or what is... Oh, hang on. Let me pause real quick and find out if Old Geek still didn't make it in. Okay, so we're going to take a look at set-driven key. Now, set-driven key is really just an extension of keyframe animation. So let's do a little kind of talk and review about it. Set-driven key. Now, Fo, I know you know all about this stuff, so... Up to now, we have been looking strictly at keyframe animation, which is very, very cool stuff. And when working with keyframe animation in the graph editor in Maya, or even when you're just conceptualizing it, you have a graph, and you will plot keyframes on this graph, and the computer will interpolate in between those keyframes. Now, when you are animating in this fashion, you have two axes on this graph. What does the vertical axis represent? Anyone? Value. Good. Specifically, attribute value. And the horizontal axis? Lotso got it in time. I think he was just sitting there with it in the panel, like waiting to press enter. I really should have just had a trick question, like, what's the capital of Assyria? And he probably would have hit enter, and I would have had to hurl him over a cliff. So, horizontally, we measure against time. This is how keyframe animation works. Time is the driving factor. When you hit play, time is always marching forward. And as it marches forward, it drives your attribute along this curve from point A to point B, and the result is animation. So, let me get rid of all those little dashes. They're distracting to me. That's how keyframe animation works, so I can assume you guys all know how that is. Set-driven key works in very much the same way. You have a graph, you have keyframes, you even have animation curves. But instead of the graph running the way it did before, you have attribute value number 1 running vertically, and attribute value 2 running horizontally. You're literally making one attribute drive another. Now, attribute value 1 and value 2 are really nice names, but they could be confusing because it's hard to know which one's which and which one's doing the real work, which one's just following along. So let's jump back real quick. Back when this was just an attribute value and this was still time, what was time's job? What did time actually do? Take a guess or a rock at it. It pushes value. That's a great way to put it, Florum. Fantastic. Time just constantly moves forward, and that pushes your values. And your attribute value responds due to that driving force. Well, that's how you can think of set-driven key, except running horizontally, you have what is called the driver, and running vertically, you have what is called the driven. These are both just attribute values. So, understanding just that, let me create a very simple set-driven key scenario over here inside of Maya. I don't want you to follow along the first time you watch that I do this. I want you to just watch and see how this works, okay? So let's jump over to create, NURBS primitives. I'm going to make a sphere, drag it onto the grid. I'm going to place it right on top of the grid just because I'm a little nitpicky. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to name this ball. Now I'm going to slide it backwards in Z. In Z, I'm going to slide it backwards, just so everybody knows what axis I moved that in. I moved it backwards in the Z axis. We'll go back to create and make a polygon cube, which I'll just drag out right in the ball's path. I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to name it door, and I'm going to move its pivot point. Right now, if I was to try to rotate this door, obviously it's going to rotate from the center, and that's no good. If we want this to behave like a door, we need to move its pivot. So I'll hold down the D key and drag this up to the top of the door. So that now when I rotate it, we get this nice kind of doggy door swaying effect. Alright, so we want to animate the door automatically moving in relation to the ball. What that tells us, the way I just said that, is that the ball... Alright, hang on. One of these is going to be the driver, and which one's going to be the driven? What's the door going to be? Dun 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 dun. Driven. Florum, if you put a question mark, it doesn't count. Ben CG gets it first with the answer driven. And the ball will be our... see, Lotso, I knew you had it in your, like, already there, ready to hit enter, but you misspelled it, so you fail, and that means Ben CG gets it again. Yeah. So there you go. So here's how we do this. Deselect everything, and you'll go to animate. You got to make sure you're in the animation menu set. This is an animation feature. So animate, set driven key, and click set. Once again, that's animate, set driven key, set. Now, this just brings up the set driven key window. The set driven key window's job is just to help you define these relationships. That's the only reason it's even here. So, let's define, who's our driver? Quick review, who's the driver? Who gets the cookie? Come on. Lots of interaction today. Wake up. The ball, very good, Lotso. Boom. Load driver. And we, obviously, process of elimination, the door is going to be the driven. So we'll click load driven. All I did was select each object, click load driver, select the other object, click load driven. Very straightforward. But just having the objects within this window is not enough. We have to verify which attribute on the driver will control the corresponding attribute on the driven. So this is where you verify things. What axis is the ball going to need to move on? You didn't even let me finish the question, MMO Dust and Florum. Put your faces in the corner. All right, we're going to have to use the translate Z attribute, obviously. Then, we need to verify the rotation we're going to be using on the door. Now, I'm going to give you guys a tip. Generally, it's a good idea just to grab your rotate tool and give this a rotation and see what updates over in the channel box. You can see rotate X going crazy, so that tells you which one we're going to be affecting. Also, you can take your rotate tool and set it to gimbal mode, and then you know with complete certainty that this is the this axis is the appropriate one. So obviously that's red, so that's going to be X. So there's a couple of different ways to verify that. So translate Z will be driving rotate X, and there you go. The set driven key window has established its relationship, and now we are ready to perform our animation. Now at this point, this is just like keyframe animation. We are just going to be dropping keyframes. Now, I want to mention this. Here's just a real quick review question. When you're animating, when you're doing your regular keyframe animation, there's a pattern to it. What do you move first, the time slider or your object? Foe throws in with time. You know, Foe, I want to give you cookies, but it's like, I kind of feel like you brought your own cookies. You know what I'm saying? Because I know how well you know Maya. I've known that for quite some time now. In fact, I'm really just kind of thrilled that you're even here. But, you know what I'm saying? Alright, so Foe gets the cookie anyway. He is kind of stealing your cookies. Basically, he's sharking you guys. Foe's walking in here like, oh yes, I'm totally in this beginner class because I'm just getting started in Maya. But he's been using it for years. I mean, there's been more than once that I can recall in 3D Buzz when I've seen him answer a question that I didn't even know the answer to. So he knows this stuff. Anyway, so let's go ahead and create our very first key. Now watch this. I have the door selected. Look what happens when I hit key. Rotate X actually gets a keyframe. So, if the proper procedure for animating objects in the regular fashion is to move the time slider first, what is my next job? What do I need to do now? Somebody just throw a rock at it. Move the ball. Joppy got it first. Am I even pronouncing that right? Is it like one of those Y-sounding J's like Yoppy? Alright. So, let's take the ball, and I'm going to move it like really far. Okay, so Yoppy says yes. We're going to move it all the way to the other side of the door, like way over here. Now, I've moved the ball. What do you think my next step is? Because it's just like keyframe animation. Rotate the door. MMO Dust is all over it. So we hit E. Let's rotate the door up. What do you think my final step is? Florum, you answered too quickly. Dun, dun, dun. Well, Florum, if you were answering the second question, you were just wrong. Time slider to end. Nope. In this case, the ball is my time slider because it is the driver, and the driver is just like time. So, I've moved the ball forward, I've rotated my driven object, in this case my door, now I click key, and create my second keyframe. When you have two keyframes, you have animation, and we can test this now. Take my ball. I mean, how cool is that, really? So if I select my door, let's go ahead and just close this window. Let's say we don't need it for now. I'll go to Panels, and we'll go to Save Layouts, and I want to go to Persp and Graph. Check this out. The door actually has an animation curve, And there's a little bit of a bug in Maya 2013. Maya is trying to tell you what the graph is demonstrating here. That we're using ball translate z to drive door.rotate x, but notice as you get away from 0 on the graph, door rotate x marches away into the distance for some reason. That's got to be an interface bug, because that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But you can see the relationship right here. With the ball at a translate z of around -11 or so, give or take, the door is rotated to 0. With the ball translated to about +10, the door rotates up to -108.616 degrees. And there's interpolation in between the two. In fact, that interpolation curve is kind of important. If we take our ball and I just start to move it, let me try to move it at a constant pace, which I know is going to be really tricky to do by hand. But you can kind of feel how the door speeds up and then slows back down. Now that looks very elegant for sure, but we can adjust that. If I take our curve here, I could make this linear, and now the door is going to move at a constant rate. So pretty fancy. Now, I want everybody to do this now. You've seen it once. You've seen how this works. Now we're all going to do it together. So File, New Scene, Don't Save. I know some of you probably already did it with me anyway, but now we're all going to do it together. So create NURBS primitives sphere. Create a sphere. Put it on the grid. That's way too big, actually. Let me make that a slightly smaller sphere. There we go. That makes me happy. And pull it back in the z-axis. Go back to Create, Polygon Primitives. Make a cube, drag it out, give it some height, and a couple of things. Make sure your ball is named ball. Make sure your door is named door. And move the pivot point of your door with the D key, once again, up here to the top. I'll give everybody a really quick second to catch up with that. Okay, so now we continue. We have our ball, we have our door. Now we need to bring up the set-driven key window. That can be found under Animate. Make sure you press F2 if you don't see that animation menu. So Animate, Set-driven key, Set. Now in this case, I already had my door selected. Please note, this window tries to help you. Whatever you have selected will automatically pop up into the driven panel. That's good, but it can also be bad. For instance, if I select my ball, I can do this again, and suddenly the ball is in the driven panel. So you got to watch out for that. That's why I generally try to remind people to deselect everything, at least when they first get started. But if you forget, like I just did, then that happens. Either way, select your ball and click Load Driver. Select your door and click Load Driven. Now, at this point, you need to verify your axes. Because if you mess this up, you will get a set-driven key, which does not work at all. So select your ball. Move your ball through the door. Just slide it right through the door. Don't worry about the fact that the door isn't doing anything. But while you're moving it, take a look over there in the channel box. Do you see what's updating? In my case, it's Translate Z. So that's our attribute. Click on Translate Z in the driver panel. Next, grab your driven object, in this case your door, and rotate it to be open and closed. You'll notice in the channel box that Rotate X is updating. You can also hold down E and left mouse and set your rotate tool to gimbal mode, and that'll help give you a more solid idea of exactly which axis you need to be rotating on. So in my case, again, that's Rotate X, so I'll just select Rotate X. So you should now have the appropriate attributes selected in the Set-Driven Key panel, and I'll give everybody a quick ready check to get up to this point. Okay, so we've got that working. Our next step is to create a key. Just click Key. That's your first relationship right there. You're saying that when the ball is right here, the door is in the closed position. Next, move the driver first. You always move the driver first. I'm going to say it one more time. Always move the driver first. So we're going to take our driver and we're going to move it all the way through to the other side of the door. After you have moved the driver, you need to update the driven. So select your door and rotate it open. Now you need to establish that second relationship. Basically, you need to press that second keyframe. Or create that second keyframe, thank you. So click the key button. And now, when you move the ball, the door automatically opens. And while you guys are getting to that point, I'll give a ready check, but I'm not going to pause. So, I'm going to undo, actually, and this is just for me. You do not have to follow along with us. Watch carefully. Or don't. This is just because it's cool. Let's go over to the side view of the scene. Yeah, this will do. It's a nice side view. And it's from the opposite side, but that's okay. I can work like this. And let's hide the grid, because that's annoying. And I'll key. Now, I'm going to press the ball, or just so it touches the door, like so. And click key. Now, I'll put the ball kind of just partially through the door. Grab my door and rotate the door so it's sitting right on top of the surface. Key. Hang on just one second. Okay, so we've got a key there, or at least I hope we have a key there. I'll move the ball a little bit more, rotate the door a little more, and key again. I could do this with animation curves later, but I'm being kind of lazy. And rotate here. Oh, we're so close. Just set it right on top of the surface and key again. And then, hang on, we got to get it like right on the top. So rotate. That's pretty good. And then key. And to about here. I'll rotate down and hit key, and then I'll move it to maybe over here, and we'll just close the door. So I'll just take my rotation, set it back to 0, and key one more time. Now watch what happens. Dump. Dump. It looks really cool in perspective, because it looks like the ball actually pushes the door open. So there you go. Now you guys don't really have to do that with all the extra keyframes. I just wanted to show you that you could. If you do, though, or if you ever play with that, and you go to Panels, Save Layouts, and check out Persp and Graph, you can see I created a whole bunch of keyframes just to make this shape. So you could just make this shape with your animation curve and not need all those extra keyframes. Just FYI. So, pretty fancy, huh? I mean, I think it is. I think it's just the bee's knees. It's also something that I think you should practice at, because the various ways you can apply set-driven key in a scene will probably blow your mind. For instance, what if, now you don't necessarily have to follow along with me on this one, I'm just going to show you some stuff. What if we go to Create, Polygon Primitives, make a cube, drag out the cube, like so, and then hold down D. This time I'm going to move this over to the side. We'll still call this door. But what if I wanted an attribute that would allow me to open the door whenever I wanted to? Well, watch this. I can go to Modify, and we've already seen how to do this. We can go to Add Attribute, and I'll bring in an attribute called Open Door, like so. I'll give this a minimum value of 0, a maximum value of, oh, I don't know, let's try 10, and a default of 0 as well, and then click OK. Now I have an open door attribute. It goes between 0 and 10, but it doesn't really do anything. Like when I showed you guys adding attributes in the previous class, this is a lot like taking a switch, mounting it on your wall, but not connecting it to any wires. It's a lot of fun to go flick it up and down, but it doesn't really do much. So now we change that. We make it do stuff. How do we do that? We go back to Animate, Set-Driven Key, Set, Kablam. Now here's where it gets kind of fun for everybody to pay attention to. What is our driven object? The door. What is our driving object? Still the door. But it'll be two entirely different attributes. You can't have the same attribute drive itself. That'll be a cyclical relationship, and Maya will yell at you. But we can make the open door attribute drive, ooh, which rotation? We need to know for sure, so let's test it. Looks like rotate Y to me. So we'll grab rotate Y. Click key, take open door, slide it all the way up to 10, take our door, open it up to whatever we think it needs to open up to at maximum, or maybe a little bit beyond if you're an animator, just kind of as a side note. Click key again, close this window, grab open door, and now I have an attribute to open and close that door whenever I want to. Dun, 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 dun. Or I could have put the open door attribute over on a locator or on any other object I wanted to put it on. So there's a lot of different ways to apply this, as you can see. There is one more thing actually there's a couple more things I want to show you about set-driven key before we move on. I need to show you a lot of different ways you can apply this. For instance, when you are using the set-driven key window, let's just open that window up real quick. Animate, set-driven key, set. These panels don't really do much. They kind of help you see what your relationship is going to end up being. The real work is done when you click the key button. And it's important to know that, because everything you do in Maya, every single thing you do in Maya is going to run some kind of a mel command under the hood. And for what we're going to take a look at a little later today, we need to know what mel command is used to create a set-driven key. So let's take a moment and let's figure out how to make a set-driven key in code. You want to? Of course you do. I'm just going to assume you all just shouted yes at your monitor. So let's create some object. Actually, let's just recreate our little door ball scene. We can do it really fast this time because you guys have now done it a couple of times. You're probably all warmed up for making spheres and doors. So here's a sphere. Create. Polygon primitives. Hopefully you all are done before I am. So cube. Hold down D. We'll lift this up. Fantastic. It's a tiny little sphere too, but that's okay. You know, he doesn't need to be that big. Now, let's load up our driver, which, same as before, is going to be the ball. Oh, let's name that too, because that's annoying. Ball. Door. Notice, though, this window does not update. You will need to reload your driver. Take your door, load driven. Now, we've seen all this up to this point, so we have translate Z and then rotate X. Now, up to this point, we haven't really done anything. These panels are just helping us define which attribute will be talking to what other attribute. The real magic takes place when we click the key button. But what magic is that? What's really going on? The neat thing about Maya is that it will tell you. You can make Maya tell you every little bit of mel code which is running under the hood and use that to write your own scripts. So if you don't know how to write your own scripts, you can actually make Maya teach you as long as you know how to do it in the interface. So what I'm going to do is open up the script editor. The script editor is found at this little tiny button in the lower right-hand corner of your interface, or you can optionally grab it by going to Window, General Editors, and you'll see the script editor. Now it turns out that my script editor is special because it already had the command sitting right there in front of everyone, but we're going to pretend that that didn't just happen. Once you get the script editor open and sized up because you're running a very small screen space to make sure that you can record your class and transmit it out to a whole bunch of people, I want you to go up to the History menu and make sure that Echo All Commands is on. When this is on, Maya will report back every single little inane command that is possibly running no matter what you're doing. In fact, it'll overdo it. It'll often give you a lot more data than you really needed. For instance, watch the script editor closely right now. If I click on menus, you'll see that the script editor is actually giving me the underlying mel command which shows those menus. Every little thing is affected. If I get tired of seeing all this history and I want to clear it out, there really is a clear history button. There's clear input and clear history. Let's click on clear history. It wipes out everything that was up there, but then I can't help but feel like Maya's being a little bit of a smartass right now, but it's just how the program works. I understand it perfectly. But not only does it wipe out the history, but it gives me the extra history of that deletion. So it goes back and it tells me that it actually did that. So that's what I want you to do. Wipe out your history so that you got nothing else up here. Then reach over to your set-driven key window and click Key. Now, as I mentioned, we get a lot more data here than we really need. We get generate set-driven command. That is an internal procedure. A procedure is kind of a collection of mel scripts that do a certain job. One of the best analogies I know for it is like when you tell somebody to wash the dishes. You don't tell them to take the dirty dishes, put them in the sink, run water, add soap, give them a scrub down, dry them off, and put them back where they belong. You just say, hey, go wash the dishes. Well, generate set-driven command. Yeah, I know. With some kids, you have to. With generate set-driven command, that's like saying, hey, go make a set-driven key for me. Instead of giving all the little commands, which really there's only one, which is set-driven keyframe dash current driver ball.translate z door.rotate x terminate. What we're interested in is this information right here, the actual command to make it happen. So what I want you to do is grab that, hit Control-C, and paste it down here into the input area. Now, get rid of the set-driven key window. Matter of fact, for now, you can even close your script editor if you're feeling froggy. As long as you have your mel line open, you can paste in your mel line, which in this case is, once again, set-driven keyframe dash current driver, and then the driving object and attribute. It's ball.translate z. So notice, it's the ball object, and then a dot, and then the actual driving attribute. Then a space, then door.rotate x. So that's the driven object dot driven attribute, and then a terminator. So you can press enter, and that drops in a keyframe. Now, our next step, just as before, is just to move the driver, then move the driven. We've already done it now at least once. And now we want to hit that key button again, but we don't have to. Come back over here to the mel line, tap the up arrow key, press enter. Actually, if you look down here in my graph editor, it already created the curve. We have just created a set-driven key using mel. That's going to be important a little later today when we start to rig up our sparkler for its material, and now I'm going to show you how. But first I want to give a quick ready check for people to get to this point. Okay, so everybody caught up, and we have now created a new scene. Our next step is going to be to show this one more time using the mel command and showing you why you need the mel command in the first place. Because if you don't use the mel command, sometimes there are attributes you may want to drive with a set-driven key that you just can't get to outside of code. Let me give you a quick demonstration. What I'd like you to do is create a locator. Any locator will do. And I'm going to name this, locator 1's just boring, let's call it, I don't know, control underscore thermometer. That was a really cool idea. Let's make a thermometer, shall we? I think we should. So to make a really silly, simple thermometer, we'll go to create, polygon primitives, and I'll make a cylinder. There you go. The best cylinder, or the best thermometer model you've ever seen in your life. Right there. Now, just for vanity's sake, I'm going to take the subdivisions around the axis and pull them down a little bit so the thing's not so hard to look at. Now, I want a material for this thermometer. So let's just create one. I'll open up the Hypershade window, rendering editors, Hypershade. Hopefully you all remember how to do that. And I'm going to keep this very, 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 very simple. Let's start with a Lambert. Boom, Lambert material. And I'll go ahead and apply this directly to my cylinder. That's just a middle mouse drag. Hopefully you all remember that as well. If you get stuck, you don't remember how to do something, please be sure to ask a question. I will be keeping track on the questions panel over in the webinar system. But this should all be pretty easy review up to this point. Now, I want you to bring in a ramp texture. A ramp is really just a gradient. And I want you to connect it to color. If you press 6 in your viewport, you should be able to see the end result. Now, if you don't, then you've probably been like me and you told your viewport to only use the default material, so I didn't need to do that anymore. And then I want you to double-click your ramp, and this will give you the actual gradient that's been created here. So hopefully, I mean, if you don't know how gradients work, you have these 3 color flags that you can move around, and they will change the nature of your gradient. You may leave them all at red, blue, and green, or red, green, and blue, if you like. This will still work no matter what colors are in there. I'm going to make this look a little more like a thermometer, at least to me anyway. I'm going to take this middle color and make it, oh, silver would probably be a little more appropriate. And we'll take the top one and we'll make it silver as well. And I'll push these two really, really close together down here toward the bottom. Now I'm going to give a quick ready check for people to get to this point. Ask a question if you need to. Okay, my apologies to those of you who waited for that little update because I paused and I forgot to restart after that. So I'm going to do this really, really quickly to kind of catch everybody else up who's watching this on video later on. We are now going to create our set-driven key using our mel command that we learned earlier. So this is set-driven keyframe. Then we put in dash current driver. Our driving object, as you can see, I currently have it selected here, is control underscore thermometer. Then we have to put in a dot and our appropriate attribute for the driver. Now in this case, it's going to be translate Y. There are two ways to type that. We can type out translate as one great big word and then a capital Y. That's one way to do it. Or the short method is just TY. Now our driven object in this case is going to be ramp1, the actual node, so we call it by name. We say ramp1 dot, but now we're stuck. We do not know what attribute we need to move on ramp1 in order to make this happen. This is where we get to the script editor. So open the script editor up, select your ramp, and I have to kind of make as much of my screen space as I can, and just move one of these flags. And look what comes back in the history panel. We get set attribute, or set attr, ramp1 dot color entry list 1, so there's a little 1 in there, dot position. That is your object and attribute right there. So it's a good idea. In this case, we actually have to move 2. It's a good idea to identify both of them. We have color entry list 1 and color entry list 0. Basically, this is a 0-based list that goes from the bottom up. So entry list 0 and 1 are going to be our big guys here. So what you can do is just grab that information, ramp1.colorEntryList1.position, and you can copy it. You don't even have to type it out. We'll close this out. And now, let's just paste this in right here. So ramp1, actually I have an extra ramp1, let's make sure we nuke that out. ramp1.colorEntryList1.position. Let's actually set that to 0 for the first one. That's the command we need, but if you remember, this command is just like pressing the key button, so let's get everything lined up first. So we'll make our thermometer get as low as we need it to go for starters, let's say right about down here, and we'll move our locator to that elevation as well. I'm kind of satisfied with where that is, I think that'll work just fine. And let's run our command. So we press enter once. Now all that did was that keyed it for color entry list 0. Are we done at this point? There's something else we need to do. What do we need to do? Yappy says no. What do we need to do, Yappy? Come on now. Set 1. Very good. Press the up arrow, and that just brings up the last command. How useful is that? Take your 0 and set it to 1. We now have our set-driven key established for our thermometer. Now, what's our next step? We've done a couple of set-driven keys now. What is our next step? It's always the same pattern. Move it all. Great. What do we move first? The locator. Very good. So let's take the locator and we'll slide it up to the top. Then we'll grab our ramp and then just move this all intuitively. Put it where it needs to be to look right. So that looks pretty good. Right about there. And then here's the great thing. Just run both those commands again. Tap the up arrow key a couple of times to get color entry list 0. Tap it a couple more times to get position 1. You're finished. Test it out. you can actually animate a thermometer changing now. There is a funny little catch, and to really show it off, I'm going to take my renderer and set it to high quality rendering. It just gives us instant feedback. Does anybody see what the problem here is going on? Do you see what the issue is? There's a little weird lag in there, and MMO Dust has already pegged it. It's the curves. So if we go into Save Layouts and go ahead and open up the perspective in the graph, and let's find ramp 1. So I have to select it, and then to really get to it over here in your attribute editor, just click on the select button. And there you go. There are animation curves, and you can see that they have that nice S-curve shape to them. What that means is, near the beginning and end of that curve, we're going to get some separation. So, what do we need to do to these curves to solve the problem, anyone? Need a linear curve. Yappy was already all over it. So just click on linear, and now, as you move your locator, that slides right up and down. You have a beautiful way to automatically update a material to animate a thermometer. I didn't even mean to teach you that. It just kind of happened. All right. Are there any questions? Okay, doesn't look like it. So, we're about 45 minutes into the video, but we're about an hour into the class. It's a really good time for us to take a break. From this point out, though, I'm going to assume that you guys kind of know this, because we will have to use this trick here in just a few minutes to create our sparkler. So I'm going to assume that you know that you could type out set driven keyframe, actually make sure you hit that capital K, dash current driver, then driver dot driving attribute space driven dot driven attribute terminator, and that would drop a set driven keyframe down. I'm going to assume you already know that. So let's go ahead and take a break. If you are trying to catch up, please go ahead and do so. I'm going to reset everybody's ready status now so you can tell me if you've made it to this point and have a functioning thermometer. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them in during the break, and I will answer them officially on once we get back. Let me see, a couple have come in already. I don't quite understand why we had to key 0 and 1. Well, I can actually show that really quickly. In the script editor, how would you execute the code? Enter makes a new line. Hit Control Enter in the script editor. So like if I say, here's just a really quick line of code, print hello world, Control Enter, and there you go, it types out hello world for you. And there you go, Lawrence actually just answered the question for himself. He said, actually just ignore me, I only moved the one color section, so I needed to key 1 and not 0. I see what you're saying. See, what we've got to do here is if we only key or only animate one of these values, then we end up with color separation instead of having this nice crisp line between red and white. In order to keep that nice clean division, we have to move two flags in tandem along with each other. So that's why we're actually animating two separate values. It's really easy to kind of overlook and get confused, though, especially if you think that we should be able to just move one. Now, if we set the interpolation of our ramp to none, we could probably get away with moving a single flag. But I don't want you to get used to that, because here in just a little bit, when we animate our sparkler, we're going to make use of this fact that we have that little bit of blending in between the two colors. So we need to already be used to animating two things at the same time. Okay, so that, I think, sets us up nicely for a break. So I will see you guys when we get back.